Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the American Enterprise Institute. I'm Robert Doar, AEI's president, and I am especially honored today to welcome Ambassador Nikki Haley to our building. Now, before I get to the main attraction, however, I'd like to say a word about Zach Cooper, our principal host and moderator this morning. Dr. Cooper is a senior fellow here at AEI, and among other distinctions, Zach holds a PhD from Princeton University, where he still teaches. He publishes frequently, advises members of Congress and officials in the Biden administration, and has worked on national security issues for President George W. Bush. Along with AEI's Dan Blumenthal and Derek Scissors, he's leading AEI's New China Playbook project to ensure that leaders in Congress and the next administration properly understand both the threat of the Chinese Communist Party and how America's enduring strategic advantages position us to compete and to prevail. Leading public figures, especially candidates for president, come to AEI to address the great challenge of China because our scholars have been intellectuals leaders in this debate. They've recognized the dangers the Chinese Communist Party poses to its neighbors and to the free world, and that's why we've launched our New China Playbook, to build on our scholars' track record of accurately predicting the authoritarian and aggressive direction of the CCP. AEI scholars are using their insights on China to inform America's leaders and the leaders of allied nations around the world. Now, I am sure Ambassador Haley needs no introduction, but I would like to recognize her service as United States Ambassador to the United Nations and as Governor of South Carolina from 2011 to 2017. Ambassador Haley is also, by the way, the 2019 recipient of the Irving Kristol Award given by AEI to an individual who has made exceptional intellectual and practical contributions to improve government policy, social welfare, or political understanding. Nikki has been a great governor, a great ambassador, and a great friend to AEI. I now will turn things over to Ambassador Haley, who will address these issues before sitting down for a conversation with Dr. Cooper. Please join me in welcoming Ambassador Haley to the podium.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. I'm going to tell you in advance, I'm getting over a bout of laryngitis. So if you see me start to grab the water, that is why. My husband, if he wasn't deployed, he would be thrilled that I couldn't speak for a while. So, but I want to thank Robert. I want to thank AEI for being just such great friends and partners through the years. When I was governor of the state of South Carolina, as UN ambassador, it's great to know that we have organizations like this that really keep things front and center of what we should be thinking about. You know, 4 years ago, last month, shortly after I left the United Nations, I gave a policy speech about China. I was in Seoul, South Korea. One part of the speech was about what I had seen at the United Nations. The other part was a broader look at the West's approach to China over the past several decades. I warned about China's growing military power, its growing repression at home and aggression abroad, and its growing challenge to American interests and America itself. I specifically called out its military-civil fusion program, where the Chinese Communist Party exploits American companies to strengthen its military. I urged our leaders to, quote, think about China critically, creatively, and courageously. China's police state is more comprehensive. It has destroyed freedom in Hong Kong. It has deepened its genocide of the Uyghurs. It is threatening Taiwan daily. Its no-limits alliance with Russia has cemented. And of course, there was COVID. Despite its ongoing attempts at cover-up, the Chinese Communist Party bears responsibility for the worst worldwide pandemic in a century, with up to 20 million deaths. Through it all, the Chinese military has become even stronger testing us like never before. Last month, a Chinese fighter jet came within 400 feet of an American aircraft flying in international airspace above the South China Sea. Earlier this month, a Chinese naval ship came within 150 yards of an American destroyer in the Taiwan Strait. We all remember the Chinese spy balloon that flew over our homeland just months ago. It wasn't taking pictures of our prairies or our beaches. It was flying over American nuclear missile sites. And this month it was revealed that China has developed a spy base in our own backyard on the fellow communist island of Cuba. These provocations are not coincidences or accidents. They are the purposeful actions of a communist dictatorship that is determined to expand its power and defeat America militarily and economically. America is China's #1 target. The question is, what are we going to do about it? This is a central question of presidential leadership, both for the current president and for the next one. Communist China is the greatest threat to American security and prosperity by far. It has stated its goal of diminishing American influence in the world and replacing it with its own. To meet this threat, there must be a series of fundamental shifts in our policies. Before I describe those changes, let's first look at what we need to shift away from. China became a member of the World Trade Organization in 2001. This proved to be a fateful decision. America brought China into the WTO. Democrats and Republicans supported it. At the time, and for more than a decade after, there was a bipartisan consensus that this was all reward and no risk. Our leaders told us it would bring China into the modern economy and open its huge market to the world. They said it would make China more free, open, and democratic, that China would become more like us. I understand why this dream was appealing. We saw it happen with Japan after World War II, and then again with one Asian country after another. From South Korea to Singapore, they moved into the company of free and open nations, but not China. This American assumption proved disastrously false. Our thinking neglected the role of communist ideology. The Chinese Communist Party didn't want to be like us. It still doesn't. China grew stronger by taking advantage of our open markets, but it also grew less free. President Donald Trump deserves credit for upending this bipartisan consensus. He made both parties take off their blinders. Despite the divisions in our politics today, both parties are now more clear-eyed about the Chinese threat that has been there for a very long time. That's a good thing. But being clear-eyed is just not enough. It's not the same as having the right solutions and the necessary determination to protect America. President Trump was almost singularly focused on our trade relationship with China. He was right about our trade abuses. It was and still is a critical issue. But Trump did too little about the rest of the Chinese threat. He did not put us on a stronger military foothold in Asia. He did not stop the flow of American technology and investment into the Chinese military. He did not effectively rally our allies against the Chinese threat. Even the trade deal he signed came up short when China predictably failed to live up to its commitments. He also showed moral weakness. In his zeal to befriend President Xi, Trump congratulated the Communist Party on its 70th anniversary of conquering China. That sent a wrong message to the world. Chinese communism must be condemned, never congratulated. China was militarily stronger when President Trump left office than when he entered. That's bad. But Joe Biden's record is much worse. The list of President Biden's failures in China is long. He has refused to seriously investigate China's cover-up of COVID origins. He has done little to stop the expansion of China's footprint on our homeland. He has failed to address China's major role in the fentanyl crisis. He has weakened our own military. His obsessive focus on climate issues naively plays into China's negotiating hand. And the situation is getting worse. Secretary of State Blinken's visit last week was a gold-plated invitation for more Chinese aggression, not less. Just look at what happened. China scolded us. Then President Xi pronounced it was a good meeting. He only says that when he gets a lot more than he gives. In fact, he gave us nothing. Joe Biden has more than 18 more months in office. Mark my words. He's going to keep ignoring the Chinese threat. We'll have wasted 4 more years. We're falling behind, but China is moving forward faster than ever. Its military is modernizing and expanding at a rapid pace. It's building infrastructure around the globe that can be used by its military. It has new stealth bombers. It's preparing to fight in outer space. It has hypersonic missiles that we don't. The Chinese Navy is especially concerning. Less than 10 years ago, it was about the same size as ours. Today, it has the largest fleet in the world, with 340 ships, and plans to hit 400 in the next 2 years. We don't have plans to hit 350 ships in the next 2 decades. China has dramatically expanded its cyber capabilities too. Its hackers and spies are targeting everything from our military bases to our critical energy infrastructure. China has also deepened its infiltration of our homeland. It's exerting influence on campuses and even setting up police stations on U.S. soil. And China's abuse of American businesses is worse than ever. Every U.S. company that works in China is effectively required to support the Chinese military. They don't have a choice. The Communist Party is stealing our investments at a tune of $600 billion a year. It's using American enterprise to undermine American strength. And President Biden is letting it happen. The Communist Party's endgame is clear. China is preparing its people for war. President Xi has openly said it. We should take him at his word and act accordingly. Instead, President Biden continues to dither. His action makes conflict more likely. We must act now to keep the peace and prevent war. And we need a leader who will rally our people to meet this threat on every single front. As president, my top priority will be strengthening America's economy and America's military. We will protect America's prosperity and homeland from Chinese aggression. We will tackle Chinese meddling in our society and its manipulation of our economy. And we will hold the Chinese Communist Party accountable while putting it on the global defensive. This is a sea change in American policy. It's grounded in the reality that our leaders have failed to admit. China is much more than just a mere competitor. Communist China is an enemy. It is the most dangerous foreign threat we've faced since the Second World War. We have to stop wasting time. That was true 4 years ago when I said as much in Seoul. It is more so today. It is time to marshal our strength and national will. We must respond in 3 ways: domestically, economically, and militarily. Confronting China starts at home. We must systematically eliminate its interference and infiltration of our society. The situation is worse than most people realize. The Communist Party has abused our openness in extraordinary ways. It uses our economic freedom to threaten our security and food supplies, our academic freedom to corrupt our students and our scholars, and our freedom of speech to spread lies and shape our laws. China treats our homeland like its personal playground. In recent years, Chinese investors have bought nearly 400,000 acres of land in our country. That's twice the size of New York City. We aren't just talking about any old property. China has bought miles of farms near sensitive military facilities, and China has taken a majority control of agricultural industries. This must end. The line between Chinese investors and the Chinese Communist Party is exceptionally thin. The national security risk is too great. We must prevent China from buying more land and force it to sell what it already has. We need similar resolve in our higher education system. China has set up so-called Confucius Institutes that spread communist propaganda on our college campuses. When they get shut down, they quickly reopen under a different name. And China is giving hundreds of millions of dollars to our universities. This funding gives Beijing a foothold in the best research institutions in the world. It wants our research for its military. We should end this practice. We should ban all propaganda centers and eliminate federal funding for universities that take Chinese money. Universities must choose. You either take Chinese money or you take American money, but the days of taking both are over. It shouldn't be a hard decision. There are other steps we must take to protect our domestic institutions. Right now, the United States lets Chinese companies lobby our government. Yet Beijing ultimately controls those companies. These businesses are basically front groups for a foreign power. We should ban all lobbying from the Communist Party and Chinese companies and prevent former members of Congress and military leaders from helping lobby on China's behalf. Beijing should never be allowed to influence our laws. China is also behind the fentanyl crisis that's killing tens of thousands of Americans every year. Chinese companies make nearly all of the precursor chemicals that Mexican cartels turn into fentanyl. China cannot plead innocence here. It knows exactly what it's doing by putting these chemicals into the hands of the cartels. We've tried sanctions, but they're not working. We must ratchet up the pressure. As president, I will push Congress to revoke permanent normal trade relations until the flow of fentanyl ends. If China wants to start normal trade again, it will stop killing Americans. That brings me to the second big policy shift. In addition to protecting our homeland, we must protect our economy. I'm a firm believer in economic freedom, but it has long been recognized that not all trade with trading partners is the same. The father of capitalism, Adam Smith, wrote in The Wealth of Nations that Great Britain's interest in preserving naval supremacy was more important than free trade in the maritime sector. Defense, he wrote, is of much more importance than opulence. The challenge today is that national security is affected by almost every part of our relationship with China. No one understands that better than the Chinese. They have desperately pursued American investment and innovation precisely to strengthen their military. American companies are banned from selling military hardware and services to China, but they still sell billions of dollars worth of goods to the Chinese market. We must look at these sales through a national security lens. Much of its military application simply slips through the cracks of U.S. law. But Chinese law requires U.S. companies to transfer technology to Chinese companies as part of the price of doing business on Chinese soil. This cannot continue. U.S. businesses must recognize the threats to themselves and to our American security. Beijing's focus on military fusion demands it. China already steals up to $600 billion of American intellectual property every year. Our loss is the Chinese military's gain. Advanced technology is especially important. Right now, our federal government keeps a detailed list of the most sensitive technologies that are dangerous to export. But it's not a blacklist. We still let companies send this tech to China. They just have to file the right application. It happens all the time. In 2022, the Biden administration approved 70% of licenses for exporting controlled technology to China. Think about that. We must end the export of sensitive technology to China, full stop. And we must keep China away from our biggest breakthroughs and cutting-edge companies. We know Beijing wants to beat America in artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and a host of other advanced technologies. We also know that American innovation is still the best in the world. The Communist Party knows that too. Their approach is basically, if you can't beat them, then buy them or steal it. We should block any Chinese purchase of an American company specializing in advanced technology. No more exports and no more acquisitions, period. For that matter, we should have no more investments that undermine America. China can't buy certain technologies from American companies. But Americans can still invest in Chinese companies developing those same technologies. Talk about a loophole. It's a massive one. By one estimate, U.S. portfolio investment in China rose $800 billion between 2017 and 2020 alone. Not all this money is funding military and technology breakthroughs, but much of it is. China is using our federally invested pensions to leapfrog America. The American people deserve better. I will protect our investors and our national security. No more investments in any company that helps the Chinese military or supports the Chinese party, period. These steps are needed to prevent war and preserve peace. We can no longer be complicit in China's military rise. For that matter, we cannot continue to neglect our own military. This is the third big task we must undertake. It's time to face a hard truth. Our military strength is not where it should be. It must be transformed to meet today's and tomorrow's challenges. We're falling behind in almost every single area. Look at recruitment. The Army, Navy, and Air Force all say they'll miss their recruitment goals this year. China is building more hypersonic missiles by the day. Our hypersonic missile project is barely off the ground. Or how about nuclear weapons? China has now more ballistic missile launchers than we do. It's building warheads at a rapid pace at a rapid pace and deploying delivery vehicles we don't have. Meanwhile, our nuclear triad is getting old and older. President Biden is considering retiring some nuclear weapons and even canceling new ones. Few things are more foolish in a rapidly dangerous world. China is also investing more than ever in space and cyber warfare. These are the battlefields of the future. We have a long way to go, and in many respects, we're playing catch-up. A stronger military is the linchpin to our national security and to preventing wars. Some might wonder if such a buildup is possible in a short amount of time. Our supply chain dependence on China makes it a serious challenge, but it must be done, and it can be done. The Pentagon has gotten lazy. Its procurement projects drag on for decades. We must cut through the bureaucracy, stop playing favorites with defense companies, and bring brand new weapons and projects to the field in record time. We can't wait 50 years for new ships and missiles. We can't even wait 5 years. If China can do it, America can too, and we can do it far better. We must also rally nations to our side. We should deepen our military ties with Japan, South Korea, and Australia, and forge stronger bonds with India and the Philippines. And we must finally get Europe to recognize that China threatens it as much as it does us. European countries are even further behind than we are in recognizing the Chinese threat. It's time to shake them from their slumber. We need a united front across the world, and one U.S. partner is especially important. Taiwan is the Communist Party's most immediate target. If China invades, it will trigger the war that none of us want. We cannot let that happen. We and our allies should give Taiwan everything it needs to defend itself. We should make sure the American naval presence in the Taiwan Strait remains strong, and we should let China know that an invasion of Taiwan would not just be met with a few slap-on-the-wrist sanctions. It would mean a full-blown economic decoupling and would massively damage China. We should stand with Taiwan without apology because our security is intertwined. The actions I have laid out today were needed yesterday. They should be implemented tomorrow. Sadly, President Biden has shown he is not up to the task. A new president is needed, one who will do what's necessary to defend America. But there's one thing that needs to happen before the next election. In fact, it must happen now. The United States must help Ukraine defeat the Russian invasion. A Russian defeat would be an enormous loss for China and a true victory for peace. The events of this past weekend show how weak and shaky the Russian leadership is. Now is the time to seize the moment and help Ukraine bring this war to a decisive end. Make no mistake, China is watching the war in Ukraine with great interest. And what has it seen so far? It has seen the failure of Russian aggression. It has seen the Russian military weakened for a generation. It has seen an unusual level of European unity and previously neutral European countries joining the Western Alliance. And it has seen a strengthened, not a weakened, Ukrainian resolve. China is seeing what it most fears if it invades Taiwan. But that could change in short order. If America and the West abandon Ukraine and Russia succeeds in taking its territory and freedom, China will hear an unmistakable message. That message can only encourage China to invade Taiwan as soon as possible. The warning signs are already flashing. President Biden has been far too slow and weak in helping Ukraine. He has dragged out this war and given Russia and China a reason to question our future commitment. That's a recipe for more war in both Europe and Asia. Our policy should not be to freeze the war on current front lines. That would lead to a stalemate and continued fighting. Our policy should be to help Ukraine reclaim its territory and bring this war to a quick and decisive end. That does not require American troops or cash assistance. It requires us and our allies to supply the equipment, ammunition, and training to get the job done. If we do that, China will see our resolve and rethink its plans on Taiwan. It will see the true cost of war before it considers launching one. It will realize that America will not roll over, that we will do what is necessary to defend our interests and defeat our enemies. That is the surest way to peace. If we had sent this message years ago, there would never have been a Russian invasion in Ukraine, and Chinese aggression would have been curbed. China has spent decades preparing to fight. It has played us like a fiddle. Our leaders have responded with apathy and even applause. This inaction has weakened America and strengthened China. We're now in a very dangerous situation against a very powerful enemy. The hour is late, but it's not too late to wake up and to take charge of our destiny. Peace depends on it, and freedom demands it. If we rally now, the Communist Chinese Party will eventually end up on the ash heap of history, like the Soviet Communist Party. We still have the power to protect our country. We only need courage and leadership to meet this threat head on. Now is the time to stand up to China and stand together to save America. Thank you, and God bless.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ambassador Hayley. I know you've managed to bring about half of Washington's press corps here, and I see they're ready to ask questions. But before they do, I get to ask you a couple.
Great.
So I want to begin because this is a particularly interesting time in Washington. We're seeing the Biden regime really shift for the first time from what is 2 years where they weren't engaging that much with Beijing to now, I think, the beginning of a series of visits. As you mentioned, we just had the Secretary of State go to Beijing. Now it seems that Treasury Secretary Yellen and perhaps the climate envoy John Kerry are going to go in the next couple of weeks or months as well. So the argument the Biden team makes is that we have to engage to prevent conflict. Of course, critics have claimed that this is not indeed what's going on, that this is perhaps talk for talk's sake. So you've been ambassador to the United Nations, you've negotiated with the Chinese. I want to hear a little bit about how you think about the purpose of negotiating with an adversary, with China. What do you think we should be thinking about getting out of these conversations from a strategic perspective?
I don't mind that Secretary Blinken went to China. We should always keep that communication going when we're dealing with our enemies. It's the way they're doing it. It's showing that America's running scared from China. That's what turns my stomach. The idea that Secretary Yellen said we should look for more ways to economically tie ourselves with China, that's ludicrous. And the idea that John Kerry wants to go make a climate deal with China so that we can be friends, that's not acknowledging the priorities that we need to be dealing with. They should be asking, why are you trying to start war? Why are you being aggressive in terms of in terms of a spy center on Cuba? Why are you stealing our intellectual property at $600 billion a year? Why are you building up your naval fleet? Why are you buying U.S. soil that happens to be near our military most sensitive military installations. There's a lot of questions we should be asking. Why are you allowing fentanyl to come across the American border? There are multiple things Blinken could have talked about, and he didn't. Instead, he sat there, and you can look at the picture and let President Xi scold us. That's not showing American strength. American strength is when you tell countries what we expect of them. You're not reactionary to how they act. China's scolding us because they can. We have to make sure we do. When I was at the United Nations, I very much told countries what America was for and what America was against. I didn't care if they didn't like me, but I wanted them to respect America. We have to shift that. Biden's not doing it. They're asleep at the wheel. They're looking more for appeasement than they are looking for strength. And that's a mistake, because that's incredibly dangerous for America and our allies.
And I do think, as you've mentioned, the area where the Chinese seem least interested in engaging is, in fact, the military-to-military area, which is the one that the administration, I think, most wants. They want some form of guardrail, but that's the one they don't seem to be getting.
Well, and think about that. The fact that the Chinese refused to answer our defense call, I mean, if that's not disrespect, and if that shows they're not in any way worried about us, it's that. I mean, that's a big deal when a country's Department of Defense doesn't answer another country's Department of Defense. That tells you everything you need to know. And that's why Biden needs to stop pandering, and he needs to start being aggressive and strong in how we deal with China.
Great. I want to shift a little bit to allies and partners, which is something you talk about a lot and you talked about here today. And we have some of our ally and partner ambassadors in the room, so I know they share interest in your comments on this. So when you think about alliances and partnerships, you've always talked about them being pretty central to the China competition. I always hear two critiques of the United States from our friends. The first is that they want the U.S. to push back hard against China in certain areas, and they're willing to go along with that, but they might want us to tone down the rhetoric a little bit. The second thing you hear a lot is that the U.S. just doesn't have an economic game plan. We don't seem to have a trade strategy. I think that's true of this administration and to some extent of the last one. And so I'm wondering, how would you think about this going forward? How do you get allies and partners along to make the most robust coalition to shape Chinese behavior over the next few years?
Our allies told me the same thing at the United Nations when I was raising a ruckus about Nord Stream. When we saw that the Europeans were completely caving to Russia, especially Germany, and we said, don't do it. You never want to be dependent on an enemy. If there's ever a lesson we should learn with China, look at what happened with Russia. If you don't think the Chinese will pull the rug out from under us anytime they want, and if you don't think that's going to put the U.S. in a bind, then you're incredibly naive. That's the problem, is we have to, instead of sitting there and listening to what our allies want us to say, we should truly treat our allies as the friends they are and give them all the warnings that we know are out there. We want them to be as protected as we do. We need more friends. I mean, look at what happened. Biden goes and basically calls Saudi Arabia a pariah. Now, MBS is going to outlive every leader. He's young. You called him a pariah, and what did you do? You sent him to China. We need the Arab countries to be with us, not China. And my guess is they would rather be with us than China. The problem is our allies don't know what we're doing. A lot of that happened after Afghanistan. I mean, the idea that we left Bagram Air Force Base in the middle of the night without telling our allies who stood shoulder to shoulder with us for decades because we asked them to be there. The British ambassadors here, the UK, we didn't even tell them we were leaving in the middle of the night. Think about what that told our friends. More importantly, think about what it told our enemies. These countries need to trust that we know what we're doing. And we're not showing that. We're not showing economic strength in a way that we have trade proposals. We're not showing military strength in the way that we're building up our military. We're not showing any sort of strength in terms of challenging our adversaries. We have to start showing what we're doing, because I know when America speaks, the world listens. When America acts, the world follows. Who we are, the world wants to be. But we have to know who we are. And America's not showing that right now.
And I want to squeeze one last question in before we come to the audience, which is about something you talked about in your remarks, Ukraine. There's a big debate on this within conservative circles about whether the United States can both address the Russia challenge and the China challenge at the same time. You've written about this, as you did today in the Wall Street Journal, and you've written op-eds about this before for them. When you look at the Russia and the China challenge, can you explain a little bit about how you think the U.S. can address both of them at the same time, right? There are some critics who say, well, the U.S. just can't help Ukraine anymore. It has to shift entirely to the China problem. How do you see this?
We can bounce multiple balls at the same time. And if we can't, God help us. But we can do that. But you have to see the correlation of China and Russia to start with. First of all, credit where credit's due. Look at the Ukrainians. Russia goes in and invades their country. They're so passionate, and they have the will to defend their country, that the men go straight to the front lines to fight for their country. The women say, we're not staying back. They make Molotov cocktails to help their husbands. Everybody gave Ukraine 5 days. And look at the passion and the will they've had to fight. Russia has fallen to its lowest point. We knew that because they were getting drones from Iran and missiles from North Korea. They raised the draft age in Russia to 65. We've seen how bad they have struggled. This weekend showed further cracks in what happens. You know, it's interesting. If you take a dictator who thinks he's invincible and he suddenly finds out he's not, it's a pretty eye-opening moment for not just Putin, but for all of the Russians and for their allies. So this is an opportunity to see that. But you look at the weakness of what they had. You look at the fact that Russia took 27% of Ukraine, and now Ukraine has taken so much back that they're down to 12%. So that's the side of the Russian-Ukrainian war and the passion and the will. Now remember, dictators tell you exactly what they're going to do. They're very transparent. China said they were going to take Hong Kong. They did. Russia said they were going to invade Ukraine. We watched it. China said Taiwan is next. We better believe them. Russia said that after Ukraine, Poland and the Baltics are next. That leads us to a world war. That's what we're trying to prevent. And before the Olympics, what did we see? China and Russia hold hands and name themselves unlimited partners before the world. And then you went and you had a Russian plane knock down an American drone. Interesting. President Xi shows up in Russia. Make no mistake, a win for Russia is a win for China. But if Ukraine wins, it sends a message to China about Taiwan. It sends a message to North Korea about testing ballistic missiles. It sends a message to Iran about building a bomb. What we need to do is make sure that we work with our allies and give them the equipment and the ammunition to win. After this weakness over the weekend, Biden should be on the phone. They should be making sure Ukraine has everything, because this is a massive opportunity right now. While Putin is distracted and unstable, this is the time that Ukraine should move. And we have to make sure that we're doing that. Unfortunately, I don't think Biden's going to be there.
Well, with that, we're going to go ahead and open it up. So I already see a number of hands. We're going to bring mics around. If you will, just introduce yourself. And I see back there in the orange, Kylie from CNN. We'll get a mic over to you.
You want to hold it? Okay. Thank you for doing this, Ambassador. It's a very useful conversation, having just traveled with the Secretary to China, so I appreciate it. I have two questions for you. One is China-related, and one is news of day. You said that the United States needs to be clear with China that an invasion of Taiwan would mean full economic decoupling. So I'm wondering if what you are calling for here is actually a holistic change in the policy that has historically been the U.S. policy for China regarding strategic ambiguity. Should the United States get rid of strategic ambiguity? And then my second question is, just last night, CNN was able to procure the actual tape of President Biden discussing classified documents at Bedminster and admitting that those documents had not been declassified before he was discussing them in a public setting. Should that tape disqualify him from running for president this time around and being president again? Thank you.
So your first question was about, you have to say the first question again because I got thrown off by your second question. I'm sorry.
I think the question was...
Strategic ambiguity, should it be dead?
This is about preventing war. That's it. Forget all the other policies. This is about preventing war. This is about the fact that America has been asleep at the wheel. We have not paid attention to the Chinese infiltration into our higher education with U.S. police stations, buying up farmland, stealing intellectual property, putting a spy center out there, building up its military. We've got to start looking at the whole picture. And the best way to deter China from invading Taiwan is to make sure we have a strong military, that we let them know what we expect of them, that we form with our allies, and that we start to take these issues head on. I think everybody that wants to talk about, strategic ambiguity and war with Taiwan, that's the wrong thing to be looking at. What do we do to stop war? That should be our number one thing. What do we do to stop war? The way you stop war is you win in Ukraine. The way you stop war is you build up your military. The way you stop war is you let China know they have to sell all the farmland and make sure that they no longer infiltrate any of our technology companies. The way you do it is you let our businesses know, hey, if China pulls out the rug from you tomorrow, where are you going to be headed? We have to start that process. China will take notice. Those are the conversations we need to have. That's why we're saying there has to be a complete policy shift so that we can prevent war. In terms of the recording that's happened, we're going to let the courts play that out and do whatever. I have long said anybody that wants to run for president can run for president. I think that's for the people to decide.
All right. Dimitri from Financial Times, we'll get a mic to you.
Thank you. I'm Dimitri Sevastopoulos, U.S.-China correspondent at the Financial Times. President Biden has said 4 times that he would order the U.S. military to intervene if China attacked Taiwan. Do you agree that that's the right message to send? And then separately, when you've talked to voters on the campaign trail, do you think the American people are ready to support U.S. military intervention to defend Taiwan against a Chinese attack?
Again, that's not what we should be talking about. It's not U.S. military intervention. It's what are we doing to prevent war. Biden, rather than sitting there, talking about whether it's going to be military or not, that's the wrong question. We need to let China know we're on to them. We need to let them know we're going to defend Taiwan by sending equipment, ammunition, and doing the training now. There's no bigger message that we could send to China than to strengthen Taiwan and work with our allies to make sure they do that. That's the biggest lesson of Ukraine. Biden sat around for a year waiting as Russia surrounded Ukraine and did nothing. We have a chance to do something. Let's get in front of the situation. Let's get with our allies. Let's strengthen Taiwan. Let's make China really see what would happen if they decided to invade. And the best way to do that is to show them what Ukraine is going to do to Russia. Let's finish it in Ukraine and win that territory back. And I promise you, China's not going to want to go against that alliance and have all of that happen. They're watching very carefully. China watched every company that left Russia. They watched every country that's helping Ukraine. They're watching all of the equipment, the ammunition that we're using. They're seeing where our sensitivities are. Let's not show them any. Let's show them that when we fight for a friend, we make sure that we give them all the ammunition, equipment, and skill they need to finish the job. I think the voters understand we want to prevent war. There's not a voter that will tell you they don't want to make sure we prevent war. That's why we don't talk about going to war. I'm the wife of a combat veteran. He's deployed right now. The last thing I want is my husband to go to war. So what I talk about every day is preventing war so that my husband doesn't have to go. Preventing war so that our military never has to be in that situation. And that's why if you ask any military soldier, any military individual who's serving our country, they want the equipment, They want the ammunition. They want the training. They don't want gender pronoun classes. They don't want DEI. They want to focus on being the strongest and best military in the world. We need to give them the opportunity to do that.
There's some great polling data out from the Reagan Institute looking at exactly these questions, which I do think shows that there's a fair amount of support among the American public, not just on the Ukraine issue, but on Taiwan as well. Josh Rogan, I saw you had a question earlier, so over to you at the Washington Post.
Thank you. Actually, Dimitri took my question, but let me come up with one on the fly. Thank you, Ambassador
Make it a good one.
Hayley, okay, I'll try. Thank you for your time today and for your
Thank you,
service.
of course.
I was intrigued by the fact that you said that President Trump did too little about the rest of the Chinese threat. And you said, quote, he also showed moral weakness. Tell us a little bit more about that. Are you referring to the Hong Kong protesters as rioters? Are you referring to his telling Xi Jinping that concentration camps for Uyghurs was exactly the right thing to do? Are there other examples that you remember from your time?
Now, I gave the example. I mean, to me, the most glaring is you don't congratulate the Chinese Communist Party for taking over China 70 years ago. We don't congratulate communism. We condemn it. That's the moral clarity that I'm talking about. We have to know right from wrong. You never go and tell someone who's stealing, oh, you go get them. Someone who's oppressing people, oh, keep oppressing. You don't tell a dictator the way they sit there and hold their hand down on their people is a good thing. You congratulate freedom. You congratulate democracy. You congratulate when people have the individual liberties to do what they need to do. You never congratulate communism. And that, I think, sends a bad message to the world. What we say matters. Countries pay attention. Our enemies pay more attention. We have to be very responsible with those words.
Great. Okay, we'll get a couple more questions in here. Sir, right there. Yeah, perfect.
Hey, David Drucker with the Dispatch. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you.
Two questions. One, along the parameters of when we talk, the world listens, and preventing war, would ending the one China policy and recognizing Taiwanese independence do that, number one? Number two, you referenced China setting up shop in Cuba to spy on us. You become president in January 2025. What do you do about that?
First of all, when you talk about Taiwanese independence, they themselves haven't said they want to be independent. They haven't said they want to be an independent country. They just want to be left alone. So I don't think it's up to us to say what they should do. They have to say it first. They have to be the ones that say, either, yes, we want to be an independent country, or no, we just want to be where we are. They've yet to say that. So we shouldn't jump in front of them and do it. So I think right now, the way we see it is they're democratic, they're free, and they like being left alone. And that's what we're trying to defend. They have to make that decision. In terms of the second question you had was Cuba. So the spy said, first of all, you can't have our biggest enemy literally on our doorstep. You can't have it. So China and Cuba both need to know they have to dismantle that and go. The more important, for me, concerning part of that spy center is not just that they're spying, but are they going to send military troops there? That's the biggest concern. Are they going to start doing training there? Are we going to actually have a military that's 100 miles away from us of our enemy? We have to make sure that they disband that. And China needs to know that is a clear threat. If they're going to go complain that we're in the Taiwan Strait, which is international waters, or that we're in the South China Sea where we're doing that, you sure as hell better bet that they can't go and put up a military installation that close to us and us not see it as a provocation. Look, if we have to, I've already said, when it comes to fentanyl, when it comes to things like this, if we have to end all normal trade practices with China, there's nothing more damaging to China than for us to do that. And our national security is worth it. It is worth doing whatever it takes to protect the American people. And if that means you're doing a full-on decoupling, that means you're doing a full-on decoupling because we have American lives to save. And I don't trust China with 1 ounce of anything they say or what they do in this process.
Ambassador, we just have time for, I think, one more question, so we'll switch over here in the back right there.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear
Hi,
you.
Ambassador. I'm Zach Wise from the National Journal. Miami Mayor Francis Suarez said this morning that he didn't seem to know who the Uyghurs were in China. What would you say to him about the importance of this issue?
Over 1 million Muslim Uyghurs sitting in China. They are making them change their name, change their religion, sexual abuse. I mean, genocide. We promise never again to look away from genocide. And it's happening right now in China. And no one is saying anything because they're too scared of China. Part of American foreign policy should always be that we fight for human rights for all people. And what's happening with the Uyghurs is disgusting. And the fact that the whole world is ignoring it is shameful.
Can I ask just one final quick question on that, which is an issue you've talked a lot about is human rights consistently for years. And, there's a challenge, which is we can talk a lot about human rights, but it's not clear how much of an effect we're having. So how do you think about trying to actually change Chinese behavior in an area like this where we can't physically go in and force them to adjust what they're doing?
Don't underestimate the strength of the American voice. I mean, I saw that at the United Nations. You don't have to go fight a war. You don't have to go put sanctions. Sometimes humiliating a country and getting other countries to join is enough to move that behavior. And we saw that. China never likes to be called out. So if we and our allies seriously called out what was happening with the Uyghurs, they would throw a temper tantrum, but then they would figure out how they needed to change what they're doing. We should always speak out. We can't always say it's human rights or nothing, but we can't never not talk about the abuses that are happening around the world. Every living person deserves to have the freedoms and the safety as an individual. And America, that's what makes us great, is the fact that we're willing to call out anyone that is not treating an individual with the respect they deserve.
Well, Ambassador Hayley, thank you so much for your comments today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And we hope you will join us for future New China Playbook events. We'll have those coming up soon. But Ambassador Hayley, thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
I'm Nick Schifrin. Welcome to China, Power and Prosperity, PBS NewsHour's in-depth look at the emerging superpower. With the support of the Pulitzer Center, we start at the top by examining the strongest Chinese leader in more than 50 years. In Beijing's Great Hall of the people clap in unison for one man. Xi Jinping, Communist Party General Secretary, Commander-in-Chief, President of the People's Republic of China, says he's making China great again.
The Chinese nation has achieved a tremendous transformation. It has stood up, grown rich, and is becoming strong. It has come to embrace the brilliant prospects of rejuvenation.
It's October 2017, and Xi tells party leaders one of his core beliefs, China's destiny, is to reclaim a central role in the world.
The banner of socialism with Chinese characteristics is now flying high and proud. It offers Chinese wisdom and a Chinese approach to solving the problems facing mankind.
Not since Mao Zedong, Communist China's founding father, has a Chinese leader suggested so clearly the world could emulate China. Not since Mao has China had a leader as powerful as Xi Jinping. If what the party leader says is the Bible, the scholars who decipher it study here. The National Communist Party School flies the party flag and teaches the party's version of China, united across 55 minority groups, and the torchbearer of the communist flame. Professor Han Chun-xiang says Xi inherits that legacy and is now China's indispensable leader.
The country's development needs Xi Jinping, and people's happiness needs Xi Jinping. If China wants to become a big, strong country, it will need Xi Jinping.
Xi says his work starts at home. His goal is to double China's GDP and per capita income. He says he wants to increase the prosperity many Chinese already enjoy and now expect, and reduce poverty.
Now in the Xi Jinping era, China has developed. Xi is dealing with making China great and strong.
And that strength is also the military. Xi calls for China to, quote, stand tall in the East. He evokes memories of the Middle Kingdom, a term to describe China's centuries-long role as an international power. Xi has dramatically modernized China's army, navy, and air force, and opened up China's first overseas base. And most controversially, China claims almost all of the South China Sea and has created military outposts, flouting U.S. objections and international law. Xi Jinping's China flexes that muscular foreign policy on the world stage and the silver screen. Wolf Warrior 2 is China's highest-grossing film of all time. Star and director Wu Jing plays Long Feng, a Special Operations Forces soldier who wins the day for the Chinese military. Chinese won! When he's no longer a soldier, trouble comes to him. He becomes a rogue hero, launching a seeming suicide mission against the bad guys and teaming up with fellow Chinese to save the day again. If a story about a former soldier turned vigilante who uses bows and arrows and takes a ride in a tank sounds familiar, it is. At the height of the Cold War, the U.S. had John Rambo. Wu Jing asks, why can't the Chinese have their own heroes?
但我觉得冷锋